Welcome to Author Life Podcast, where myself and guest authors share their stories, offer tips and advice, and share our writing, publishing, and marketing knowledge. I'm your host, Delcherie Gladden. Welcome back to the Author Life Podcast. This week, we've got on Steve Novak and Meg Amor, and we're going to be talking about the editing process. Those of you who listened a couple weeks ago, we had the authors from the Island Fever anthology on, and Steve was one of those who mentioned that it was his first time really going through the editing process with a professional editor, and I think that can be a very overwhelming experience the first time. So we're just going to kind of talk about how that went and maybe some tips from both the writer side and the editor side on how to make that process a little bit smoother for everybody. But I'll have you guys introduce yourselves first. So Steve, if you want to go ahead.
I'm Steve Novak, and as Delcherie said, I'm in the Island Fever anthology, and that's my first published fiction. I had a business book published quite a long time ago now. I was working on the second one, and my authors group that I was a member of through various processes or through various steps convinced me to start writing fiction. So that's what I've been doing, been working on a novel and started writing short stories as an exercise, actually. And so that's where I'm at now.
Nice. All right. And Meg, go ahead.
Aloha. I'm Meg Amor. I am a professional editor, and I'm also a writer. I also was part of the Island Fever anthology, and that was partly to get me back into writing because it's been a while. Series that I have. So, but I've been an editor for a long time. I started out, we talked a little bit about it on Island Fever with A.J. Llewellyn, and how I started out was, I started out with one of my very first books which was 180,000 words.
Good size.
And it was so top heavy. It was awful. And I had a friend of mine, Mikey Rakes, who's also an author, and she was so kind, and she helped me show me what I needed to do to it to get it into this readable size. And so I learned a lot from her, and that was just me personally working on my own stuff. And then she said, why don't you apply to Lucid, which at the time was one of the top sort of erotica. Well, no, they were erotica, but they were love story. They were a publishing company who did a lot of stories that had basically, sex in the actual stories. And so they were all different themes and all the rest of it. She said, why don't you apply to Lucid? And I said, I don't know if I'm good enough. She said, you are. And I went, okay. So I did, and I applied to Lucid, and I got accepted. And I was like, wow, this is amazing. Well, anyway, I that was my very first professional edit with someone who was a professional. And I was so scared. I thought, oh, God, they're going to tell me you can't write, you don't know what you're doing. Oh, it was terrible. But I had this amazing editor, and she taught me a lot, and then I went on from there. So I went on to edit other people. I just basically learned a lot and kept learning and kept taking people's work that I would sometimes see, like I did with AJ, where I'd say, typos in there, can I send them to you, or can I edit this so it sits right, or whatever, and probably annoyed lots of people. But they said, yeah, okay. And that's how I started editing. So yeah, that's awesome. My story.
Oh, very cool. Yeah, and people get into it from different paths, and it's always interesting, both writing and editing.
Yes.
Just seeing where it is, and just over my time in publishing, I've worked with quite a few editors, and a lot of them I've been kind of like, what?
Really?
Like how? And there's one publishing company I worked with that their in-house editor, like I would get it back and have to go back through it and, correct all the stuff that they didn't. And it was a very frustrating experience where I was just kind of like this is like, I'm editing this better than the editor that they're paying to edit my work. And
Oh,
it's like, it's hard to find a good editor that you feel like is really thorough and professional. And, there are, of course, some really great ones out there. I think I just unfortunately have ended up with some of them who are not so great.
oh no,
So it's
that's
like when you find a good
terrible.
editor, it's like, keep them forever. And one of the best ones I ever worked with died. And then I was like, well, dang it, what do I do now? She
Well,
was older,
well,
like, I mean, it was gonna happen eventually, but yeah, aside from the fact that she was very nice and I enjoyed working with her, I was like, but I finally found the
Exactly.
editor I liked.
well, see,
I
that's why
never.
I got really lucky because AJ put together the anthology, so I had no involvement in it. And she says, "Well, I have an editor, so she's going to edit everything." So I didn't have to do any work on my own to find somebody because I know when I get my novel ready, I was going to have to find somebody, and I'm like, "Oh, how do I even find
Mm-hmm.
an editor? What's the process?" And I can kind of figure that out, but it's still daunting. So when Meg was just thrown in my lap like this, is here's your editor. I'm like, oh, okay. Well, on the one hand, that's good. On the other hand, as I have no idea who this person is or what they're going to do. So,
Yeah,
uh,
well, that's often how it is with a publishing company. They're just like, and here's the person editing your stuff, and you hope it's going to be good. And sometimes you're just like, I think the first publishing company I ever had a contract with, they accepted the book and they're like, okay, this person's going to be editing. And then I didn't hear from them for 8 months.
Ah!
And I was like, so what are we doing?
Exactly. Oh my God.
well,
And
that was
yeah.
another lucky thing with this anthology. AJ and Meg too, putting it together. They kind of rode herd on it, and we had deadlines. Here, you have to do this
Mm.
by this time. And, you get a whole bunch of authors together, and not everybody listens. But it was, you know, there was structure to it. There was deadlines, so we definitely heard back uh, from Meg with our edits when they promised they would be done. So that
That's
was
good.
another good thing.
Yes, that
Thank you.
unfortunately I've heard from way too many writers that just that timeliness is challenging with editors at time. And I think it's largely, a lot of independent authors are also working with freelance editors. It's not on a timetable with a publishing company.
Mm-hmm.
And, life gets in the way, take on too many projects, or, some people are just really flighty and disappear. Um, but it's like, that's something that it was kind of funny that you ended up emailing me, Steve, because I do like different series on my blog of like, I'll pick a topic and then it'll be like, however many weeks of themed blog posts. And the one that I'm working on right now is professionalism in writing. And,
Mm-hmm.
if you're going to be offering services, how to do that in a professional way and working with
Yeah.
clients and stuff like that. And so I thought it was funny when I saw your message. I'm like, oh, this will go right along with it.
Oh, how cool.
Because it
Well,
is
see,
like,
and
that
that's something
reputation.
that's
So
oh,
important.
sorry. As I mentioned in the previous podcast, I've since hired Meg after the Island Anthology or Island Fever, and she is really good about okay when she's going to get back to me. So I'll send her something, and I'll get to it. And it's usually pretty quick. But she tells me when she's going to get it done. About professionalism, I've been just another reason why I've been really happy with it. So,
Aw,
Oh, that's
thank
awesome.
you.
Well,
Well,
good.
I also, I mean, when I first started, I had like a similar experience to you. I started with Lucid and I was so excited. It was so amazing, that I got accepted, blah, blah, blah. When you first start, you're like, oh my God, this is, you're just so in awe that a publishing company picked you up. And then I got an email from the editor who said, all right, yeah, I've got your manuscript, da, da, da. And then I didn't hear anything for 2 weeks. So I guess 2 weeks in retrospect is better than the 8 months.
Yeah.
Like, oh, yeah, what happened? So, but that was even agitating to me that she said, oh, yeah. And then she never sort of came back to me. And I was like,
Yeah, giving that
and of course,
expectation in the timeline.
That very first edit is so, especially when you're starting out, you feel so vulnerable. Here's my manuscript. Please don't hack it to pieces and send me back these little, hacked pieces of my heart, my work, And so I was like getting anxious, and I emailed the submissions editor, and Lucid had a series of editors. On any work, you would always get edited 3 times, which was how I ended up. I followed the way they do it because they were very professional. They were a group of professional women who had put this publishing company together and really wanted it to be very on. And so we always had 3 editors on any work. We would have a content edit, then a line edit, then a proof edit. And they were all different editors who did it. So you would, work with it each time you work with a different editor. And I was lucky they were all fabulous. They were amazing people. I learned a lot from them. But that 2 weeks of just, am I waiting? Am I going to get something back? It was terrible. And then she said, oh, I've been on holiday and it's Christmas and this and that. And she was completely like, sort of like, oh, well, it's all good. And I was like, waiting. So I don't do it to my clients. I'm like, okay, when I've got a new client, I try and send something back very quickly, even if it's the first chapter of, say, a novel, so they know what they're getting. They know how I work. They can see what I'm going to do to their work. They're not spending, they can see, okay, this is how I work. This is what goes on. I'm gentle. I'm nice. I've been a writer. I am a writer, so I know what it's like to be in the process. And I don't want you to feel that way. I want you to feel like, I can relax. It's going to be okay. I'll feel okay about the rest of this being done. I'm not waiting. I'm not thinking, am I going to get back this manuscript in little pieces? So, and I'm not going to feel really yucky or horrible. Like this person's going to be like, oh, well, that's wrong. I mean, I'm very gentle with people because I know what it's like to be a writer and waiting for that process to come back. It's very vulnerable. This is not just like, standard, you're at, say, an office and you're putting together stuff. This is your baby. This is something you put your heart and soul into. And you really, really, it's a very vulnerable moment to give it over to an editor and waiting to see what are they going to do to it, Can I write? Gosh, maybe they're going to say, you know what? I don't think you should be a writer. Yeah, this is not good. And, you have all these sort of millions of terror thoughts and fearful thoughts, which is very typical of anything like that. So I work with a lot of new writers, and I love it because it's such a process. And I've started with one of my writers that's still with me, and it's very interesting listening to you guys because I never realized I have been very lucky in the people that have edited for me over the years, and that I didn't realize there were so many terrible editors out there. Some of my clients have been with me for 8-9 years.
That's awesome.
And they just regularly send me stuff. So I guess that's why.
Yeah. Well, you learned from a good group.
Sorry, I beg your pardon.
Oh, no.
Well, what Meg was saying kind of takes me back to the original idea of this podcast is when I first sent, my story in for the anthology, I was really, the first thing was fear because, this is my first fiction that's going to be looked at by a professional. And I was fairly confident in my writing for a long time. And then Catherine Knorr, who is also in the anthology, was in that group, and she had seen some of my short stories. And, they had given me really good feedback over the years. So I was fairly confident in my writing. But, I never had a real professional look at it. So, the first thing was fear. And then, so exactly what am I going to get back at this? But, when it did come back the first time, I felt good. I'm like, oh, it's not all torn up. There's the typical, you use the wrong word here or comma, and I love semicolons, so I had to see which ones of those will be taken out and
All
thrown in
of
the
them.
trash pile.
I hate semicolons.
But the first round, I felt really good about it, and since then, it's been very good. So my confidence wasn't shaken, and we'll talk about the results in a few minutes.
Well, and one thing that I wanted to ask you, because a lot of, especially brand new writers, a lot of the time I'll recommend to them a critique partner or a critique group to start out with, rather than like jumping right into a professional editor. Because if they've never really, and I used to work a lot with like teens in writing programs who, they've really never shown their work to anybody before. And to go straight from, this is, just for me, to have someone either, even just like an English teacher or, maybe not like professional editor, but in that range, and come back and it just, destroys them. And that can be really tough, especially for like the younger ones that I work with. And so a lot of times I do recommend, like, get a friend, get a parent, someone in your family, other students who like to write something similar, to start learning that process of getting some feedback that's a little bit more maybe like story oriented, or just the process, kind of that baby step toward a professional edit. And Steve, you were in writing groups for a while before you got to this point. Do you feel like that helped prepare you? Or, just kind of what was the experience of being in a writing group and getting feedback versus that first time with a professional editor?
Well, excuse me. The writing group was amazing, and I fell into that because it was a gentleman who I had worked with at one of the companies we both worked together. He knew I was working on my second business book, and he had met some other people at a writing conference, and they had formed this little group, and he said, "Oh, why don't you come join our group?" So I said, "Okay." And they were working on fiction. One person was working on a memoir, and I was working on a business book. And two of the people in the group were business professionals like myself, so they could offer some good insights. So on that, but then eventually I got into writing fiction, but the feedback they gave was excellent. And the thing I have to say about it is we were together. We were kind of a small, tight-knit group. And the thing that made it excellent was the trust. So when somebody was telling you something, there was no meanness or anything. It was just like, this is really boring, or this section is really bad. But then they would tell you why it didn't work. So they offered constructive criticism. So like, oh, this is good. This is why this is good. This doesn't work. This is why it doesn't work. And sometimes it could be, I wouldn't say harsh, but very strong. Like, oh, I like this. Like, well, you might like it, but it just is not working. So you've got to do something about it. So I got really lucky falling into a group like that. I wouldn't want to have to go out and find a group, because when I first started letting them see my writing, it was, it's kind of scary letting other people see your work. So, but I got lucky with that group. I got lucky with this anthology. I don't know.
Well, good. I hope your good luck continues.
Yeah, I hope so too.
I think it will, because I noticed that some writers they fall into I suppose a lucky groove, in terms of they end up with the right groups, the right editors, and all the rest of it. Because I noticed that when I first starting out, I was in a group and it was terrible. But then it got better. But yeah, the group was like, they were all people that have been sort of, I say this nicely, piddling around for 10 years in this group, and no one had really published or done anything, but we're heavily critiquing each other's stuff. And it wasn't, in the end, it just became like this gossip thing we did for 2 hours, and it drove me mad. I wasn't really getting anywhere with it, and I was like, wow. And they were just, I think, really having a social time, so I didn't really get anything from it. But I work with a lot of young writers too, and a lot of them come to me and they haven't had a lot of outside input, like mum and dad, or maybe a teacher at school or whatever. I've had one who's with me since she was 13. She's now a professional writer and left school, and that's what she does. It's so cool. I love seeing these young writers come through, especially because I would love to have done that I started writing really longer pieces when I was about 13 myself, and I wish I had someone who had been like, oh, or just what we have now. You can self-publish, you can do all these things by yourself. You don't have to be accepted by a house to be a writer. You can be a professional writer and be completely self-published. And everything's so available now. These guys can put out these professional books. They get professional covers. It looks like it came out of a brick and mortar publishing house, and it's just as professional. And that opportunity to be out there so early in the world is amazing. And they come to me, and you can tell from sometimes their age, the levels of their speech and things like phenomenal. I've just had one. She's been with me since she was 13. She's 18 now, and she just put together a group project. She did it. Her mum's also a writer. She's one of my clients as well, and she put together the project though. So she got another writer, and the three of them are writing this series, and it's basically what we call sweet and clean romance, which means there's just the occasional kiss, very chaste kiss, and they might hold a hand, but that's it. But they're normally often based in historical. This is about basically a group of women who worked at the cotton mills, and then they end up being mail order brides, and it goes from there. So each person, but they're very popular, those types of series, and they sell really well. People like them. They're a nice, sweet romance, and they're just a little bit of escapism from this busy world. So I love working with those authors. Sometimes they come in and you're like, wow, this person's 13 and they've written this. Mostly they're amazing. Honestly, I have really had some incredible young people come that I'm like,
yeah,
you wrote this and you're 13. And it's phenomenal. Just the skills they have, the imagination, just the wherewithal that they've put together. And Steve was talking, one of the things Steve was talking about as with me, he's like, oh, well, we've gone back and forth on this a couple of times. Do I need to pay you extra? And no, it's part of the process that I use, because I use the old Lucid process, is that I do my content edit with an author, and we go back and forth. So I'll edit, send it to Steve. Steve looks at it. He goes through, accepts or rejects what works for him, what doesn't, questions, hey, I really like this, or that didn't work. And then he'll come back to me and I go through it again. And I accept and or reject or offer, well, maybe we can do this, or da-da-da-da. And then what happens after the content edit, and we go back and forth, and then after that's fine, we're happy with it, it comes back to me again for what I call lines, what I call it read-through. It's a combination of lines and proof, and it's a new way I adopted a few years ago to make it cleaner, and it's tight. So, and you'll get a forth until everybody's happy with it. And Steve said, well, do I need to pay you extra? No, it's part of the process. And when I work with the younger people or someone who's a new author, we could go back and forth in those processes literally 20 times. It's just part of the edit. It's part of how I edit, because I want it to be right. And we did it that way at Lucid too. Every correction.
Important to have that, conversation with an editor, to be able to have that where it's like, okay, well, I don't agree with this, or I don't understand this. I'm not sure about making this change. And if it's someone that you can really trust and have that respect between, that's really important with an editor. And, I've had a few that I've worked with where I've had that ability where I felt comfortable going back and forth, and then others at times where, and maybe Meg, you can speak to this, of there's times that with an editor, you're not going to agree. You're not going to come to that compromise or that mutual, it may be either, a lot of times probably the author is like, no, I'm not changing that. And how do you handle that when an author's just like, nope, I'm not doing it?
Well, I think I've been lucky. Most of my people are fairly open to the editing process, I suppose. But also, uh, mostly it's the newer authors that I notice that are more strident about sticking with something. This is what I wrote. This is what we're doing. If it's something where it's not a rule, editing has lots of rules, and publishing does. And some of the rules are hard and fast, and some of them you're like, meh, we can skip over that. It's just a suggestion. So if it's something that's like, well, okay, it's I don't think it's great as an editor, but it's not a be all and end all. It's not a rule where obviously the grammar's really wrong, or the spelt wrong, or the word's completely wrong, or it just, if it's something that I can work around, I will. If it's something that in publishing, this is what we have to do. It's not, it's not always my favorite thing, but if you can we use one of your examples, Steve, just because it's one that I find a lot, and every single author does it, where we repeat words in the paragraphs. So, we might have a phrase that we use, and every single one of us has it. We have these phrases that we use as a continuous thing. And I've got one of my authors who always says, and I might be able to, and the able is one I'll change to, and we could. So you're taking out some of the small words just to make it a little bit cleaner and crisper. And they're not that important. You're not like, well, I love that word able, I have to there. And so there's circumstances where you can change stuff around. And then there's things where it looks fine when you're writing it, and then when it goes into publishing, if you have a lot of repeated words, it's something that readers do not like. Mm-hmm. They'll be like, oh, they repeated a lot of words. It irritates them when they're reading it. And so I will go through in a manuscript and take out the repeats. So like we had one recently with the wash, and it was used about 4 times in a short paragraph of 3 or 4 lines. And I get the emphasis, but for some reason when a reader is reading it, they're like, oh my God, again. And it's irritating. So those are the ones I normally try and stay a little bit. It's getting into the repeat a little bit. And to be honest, most of my authors are really good. They've either worked with me a long time and they know what works and what doesn't, mm-hmm. and they accept it. Every so often I get someone who's just like, no. And I gently, hopefully say, well, okay, this is what happens in publishing. It doesn't look good. It's not something that the readers like. Or mm-hmm. sometimes very long sentences. There's a sort of arbitrary rule that anything over 30 words, you'll cut the sentence. And the reason for that is, and sometimes a long sentence, it sounds really good, but what happens is they start drifting. And you don't want a reader to drift. You want them to stay in the story, connected to it. And I have to say, oh, hang on a minute. What was that? I need to go back and read that again, because that cuts the flow. So the reason sometimes I'll cut a sentence, and I normally just try and cut it in half, basically, mm-hmm. Is so that the reader has a stop point and then comes into a new sentence. So there's all these sort of little niggly little things which seem perhaps niggly to the writer, but there's reasons I do a lot of this stuff, and I try and explain it. Yeah. Every so often I've had someone who's just put their foot down, and I had one with an author a while ago, and I said, if you do it this way and it is wrong because it was something grammatically really wrong, and I was like, I can't really work around, and she wouldn't work around it. I said, if you put that in there, that's okay. I said, but you need to take my name off this as an editor. I hardly ever do it. I said, do not, if you publish this, do not in any way associate my name with this. This mm-hmm. is incorrect, and I don't want anybody knowing I edited this and left this in. And I hardly ever have to do it. I probably get one new client a year that is just like, this is what I'm using. This is how I wrote it. And I'm like, I know, but you will get people write to you and say, do you realize this is incorrect and you shouldn't have said this and that's wrong, and it doesn't come back on the writer, it comes back on me as the editor.
Mm-hmm.
What was the editor thinking when they put this out like this? Guys, this could have done with some editing. And I'm like, thanks.
Yeah, and
I
readers.
I tried to tell them.
Well, and readers don't understand that side of it. Yeah, I mean, I like as a writer and as I've done editing as well. It's like I've had those clients, and I understand like, yeah, this was probably something that the author just refused to budge on, and whatever. But yeah, as the readers don't get that. Readers are just like, oh my gosh, and they will point it out. They absolutely will. They'll report it in Kindle, or they will send you a Facebook or an email message about it.
Exactly. Yeah, they're not shy about it. And,
no.
And if it's a typo, I'm like, thank you.
Yeah, it's like, okay, we can fix that.
Didn't really get the nuance of what was happening in here. It's like, or they'll say, oh, this word's wrong, and you're like, actually, it's not, because Merriam-Webster now spells it this way, and so there's all these sort of arbitrary rules too.
There are funny ones.
There's lots of stuff where you're just like, actually, this is the way we do it now. And publishing has fads. We go through fads. Like I was saying to Steve the other day, like the word goodbye used to be 2 words, goodbye. And then Merriam was just decided, oh, well, we could have a hyphen in there. So it was goodbye with a hyphen. And now it's just goodbye with no hyphen.
Mm-hmm.
And so this changes over time in that years, 8 or 9 years I've been an editor. That's one of those words that has gone from 2 separate words to 1 word. And so, you kind of got to keep up on stuff like that. And it's arbitrary, some of this stuff. The other thing I want to say, too, you mentioned before on commas. Now, commas are one of those things that there's a few hard and fast rules. If you use the Oxford comma, which I use, then that's one of those things that's a rule. But commas are one of those things that for every single editor, I could put, say, one of your manuscripts in, Steve, and you would come back with commas in different places. Some would come out, some would go in. It is entirely up to the author and the editor. And I've had manuscripts go through Lucid when I was with them, where the first editor put in some commas, the second one took some out in different places and put different ones in, and the third editor also did the same. So it's very arbitrary, and it's also the way that people speak.
Yeah.
Like, I'm a New Zealander, obviously, I have an accent, but I speak in certain ways that my pauses are possibly in different places, and anybody is the same in the way that they speak, their syntax. And so you'll get that thing in there where the commas are in places that may or may not work for you.
Yeah, and it's about readability.
I wish I could say the commas sometimes, they might not work for you, but they're going to work. Those are one of those things too. You're like, yeah. So you'll notice the commas get taken in and out, and and another editor could come through and do something completely different again.
Well, it's funny.
It's all hard, yeah.
I remember this conversation with one of my editors. It was in a publishing group, so we had a Facebook group for all the writers, and the editors were in there, and someone had just gotten their edit back and was just like, well, apparently I don't ever use commas. And I commented, I'm like, well, you can have some of mine because I use too many of them. And the editor just laughed. She's like, it's just everybody's style. Like, it's fine. It's just commas.
And it is a style thing. And that's what people don't realize. There are some there's rules, but that are set in the publishing as we're in this current trend, and they will change. Another 5 years, there'll be things that'll change, like the M dash, which is a particularly long hyphen. Right at this moment, the M dash is there's no space between the end of one word and the start of the next.
Unless you're
another
in
5 years
journalism, and then
spaces again. So it's like, okay.
Yeah, and when I was working in journalism, like a lot of those rules are different, using AP style versus, Chicago, which is what most of, a modified Chicago is what, a lot of publishing companies use for their, style and everything. It's interesting. Yeah, it's ever evolving. But Steve, you started to say something.
Oh, yeah, I wanted to touch on a couple of things that Meg was talking about. And one is, I think it was the latest thing she worked on for me, the repeated words. And I know when I write, at first I didn't catch them until it was pointed out to me, but I repeat myself a lot, sentences, maybe a whole paragraph even, but words. But this last thing that I had sent to Meg to work on, there was a lot of repeats in there, and some of them were intentional and some of them were not. So we had a bit of back and forth, and I'd explain why some of these I wanted. So we went back and forth on a few of them, and she explained, the rules and but also why it just doesn't work. And I think I'm probably like a lot of people, and I hear that and I'm like, no, I wrote this, and this is good, and I like it. But then, step back a minute, take some time, and listen to your editor and see what they're telling you. So we cleaned up a lot of the things, and it turned out to be so much better. I still have some of the repeated words in there, but they're there on purpose for effect. But they weren't. Some of them were repeated too often, so I had to take them out, and that was good. But then another thing is, Meg would send me some comments, some corrections, or an idea for something I had written, and some of them were really good. I'm like, wow, that's really good. I wish I had thought of that myself when I was writing this. And it wasn't something drastic. It was just something that kind of fixed up what I was saying. But one of the things that I noticed right off in some of the first work she did with me is that those ideas are really good, but that's not my style of writing. Like, I can hear her, not me. So I would take her suggestions and what did I call it? Steve-ify it, or
Steve-ified, yes.
Steve-ified it, yeah. So this is another thing, especially newer people might consider, is your editor's going to make some really good ideas, but it might not sound like you. So take their idea and just put it into your voice, and that's worked wonderful, because she's been doing that throughout the pieces I've sent her.
And I think that is a really important thing for new people working with an editor to understand, because it can be intimidating, and sometimes you think, like, oh, this person knows everything. That whatever they say, I'm going to do. But it's like with any feedback, you have to look through it piece by piece and then as a whole and be like, okay, these are the things I can implement, or yes, these are, just mistakes that need to be corrected, or I'm not sure how this will work with what I'm writing, and being able to go back and forth and explain that and be like, yeah, I like this, but how do I make it work with my style, with my story, is a little bit different than maybe what a lot of people have gone through before in their writing. And I think it speaks to, Steve, you mentioned when you first, were told like, hey, Meg's going to be editing the anthology, and you're just like, okay, who's that? From going like, I don't know anything about this person, to then, building that trust up over time to where you can say like, okay, yes, I trust your judgment, and these are the things I'm just gonna, listen to automatically. Here's what I have questions about. Can we, work this piece out, and make it work for me? And having gone through that with one editor on multiple projects, would you say that was like a difficult trust to build, or because it's very personal when you first start out, and it's hard to kind of tamp that down a little bit of like, but this is mine and that's how I want it. So what was that like for you?
Yeah, well, for the first one, I think there wasn't really a whole lot of changes, and that kind of brings me to something else. I have a question for Meg and how she works. But one of the things is, I think worked really well between us is we have kind of similar sensibilities. So we kind of mesh really well. But I know our writing styles are very different, because she had a piece in the anthology and I read it, and her writing is just vastly different than my style. Uh, so, but we have like kind of a same sensibility on how to approach. The question I wanted to ask you here was, I think I read literary magazines, and I don't really see a lot of stories that are like the themes that I cover, plus the style of my writing. So I'm wondering with Meg is, when you get something new, whether from a new person or from somebody you work with, but something new, is how do you approach, here's a new story, here's a different style. How do you approach looking at that? I mean, it's got to be difficult.
Can I say it's not? I'm okay. I'm an editor and a writer myself, but I'm also a ferocious reader. I probably read 3 or 4 books a week. So for me, it's just sliding into a new style. And because I'm not reading it purely for my pleasure, I think I'm probably a little bit standing back on an internal level, but I just go into it. I'm always like, ooh, what have we got? How does this person write? What's the story? Ooh, this is good. Oh, I like this. Oh, how interesting. And Steve has this fantastic, really, he writes a lot of what I would call macabre. I want him to write a horror story because I think he would just do so well. He has this lovely twist all the time on people's emotions and how they react and how they would see the world and the ways that people get caught in stuff, and it's fascinating. And so when I get somebody who's interesting, it's always like, ooh, what have they got now? What have they written now? I'm always fascinated. But to come into it initially, it's just it's like I would start with any book, and because I'm not reading it for personal pleasure, I'm reading it on a professional level. I'm literally just trying to take in the style of how someone writes, and I'm sort of case noting as I go through it. But I don't generally read a book through before I start, because I'll miss stuff. So I edit straight off. I go straight into the edit, and as I'm editing, I'm noting the style, or whatever's going on. And if I'm caught up in the story as an editor, I'm like, ooh, this is, because if you can catch me up in that when I'm in this professional stage where I'm not just reading for pleasure, then the story's good. And it's going to be good for other people as well. So I just slide into it, really. I'm kind of, and I have to say I've been very lucky. I've had very few people as an editor where I've just thought, oh dear, oh no, oh no, what am I going to do with this? And I've had the occasional author who I've thought, yeah, you can't write. And that is a really tough one. And I will still always try and do everything I can with it to pull it into something that's super readable for people. Because sometimes people have got great ideas. They just don't always execute it as well. Like I said, I've had very few people like that. Most of the people that I get, I'm like, wow, okay. Either like, wow, you can really write like Steve can, or I'll get someone who's new and I'll think, you've got this, a little bit more processing, growing into yourself as a writer, and you're going to really fly. And sometimes the stories are not my sort of thing, there might be not something that I write across 3 genres, but it's still interesting for me. It still fascinates me. I'm fascinated by the process of how people's minds work. I'm also a therapist by trade, so I like to see how people work and how things come together. And
I don't want to know what she thinks about me after reading her writing.
Well, it's like, well, you think about the stuff that Stephen King writes. He's a horror writer, and he's a pantser writer, and he just literally, that's something I would like to touch on to, the pantser and plotter thing, because I think our new writers get so caught up in that. And he literally gets like one idea and he runs with it. One of his books, he went to use the restroom at a gas station, and then I think there was a little creek behind it, and what would happen then? And that's his whole story, was based off that one idea. And so, and I've read a lot of his stuff. He's one of the people I don't read his stories because they're not my thing, but in terms of his writing about himself or processes, I always find him interesting. He gets misquoted so often. Kill the little darlings, and people think you're supposed to kill off all your great characters. Like, no, you're supposed to kill off some of the sentences that are really not that great.
Yeah,
but it's one of those things, and you get all these funny ideas and writers groups that you're like, actually go and read what's behind that, and you might find that slightly misquoted.
Yeah, I recommend people read On Writing all the time. Like it's such a fascinating, not only, writing craft book, but
yes,
just the experience of being a writer and that being a huge part of your life. It's really fascinating to read Stephen King's book and just learn from it. Like it's one of my favorite writing books.
Well, he also, the thing is, you realize that because when you first start out, what I would say is don't read too many writing books, only because it can put you off. You're like, oh God, I'll never get up at 4 o'clock in the morning and write 3 hours, and how am I going to do that? And I need to do this, and I need to plot it out for eternity. And if you are a plotter, cool, that is so going to work for you. But if you're a pantser writer, the pantsers literally start with, like I do, oh, what happens, like with anthology, what happens here? Fever, Saturday Night Fever, there we go. The guys start a dance. My detectives are doing a dance. That's the whole plot line for my story. But if you're a plotter, you're going to plot it all out. Okay, and this happens, and this, and then that, and then that, and that, and that's the conclusion. And that really works for people who are plotters. If you are not, scrap that. Do not do it.
Well, yeah.
The only reason I say that is because I've coached young writers or new writers who have been absolutely, if you're a pantser, you can literally just launch into it. Here's how I write. I write a scene, and then I write another scene that doesn't go with the first scene, but hey, it's rolling, so I just get it down on paper. Then I'll write another scene. Oh, that would be a good ending. Yeah, that works. Put that down. They don't go together. Nothing goes together, and slowly it pieces together. I work like a jigsaw puzzle. So I've got my outline, which is my one line. Oh, the guys, my detectives go and they do Saturday Night Fever dance. That's my outline of my jigsaw puzzle, and then I'm putting together pieces. And if you're doing a puzzle, you do it the same way. You like, oh, hey, these pieces go here. You put them together, and you put another bit together, and eventually, oh, hey, hang on, those two join up. That's how I work. And that is a pantster thing. And if you are a pantster, please keep working that way, because that's how your creativity is. It doesn't have to be all linear and lined up. If you're a plotter and that's how you work, please keep working that way. But don't believe that you can't be a writer if you're not a plotter.
And everybody's process, everybody's process is so different. And I think it was last night or the night before, read this article or a blog post or something that somebody wrote that was like 3 things I learned from Dean Koontz. And one of them was like, he writes, 7 days a week, 6-hour settings. And I can't remember what the other 2 were. And I'm like, that's interesting. That would never work for me. That is not how I write. But, great for him and anybody who writes like him. But I'm more of a pantser too. I don't outline. I don't plot, but I do write in order. Right. I'll get ideas for other scenes, and then I'm like, okay, I'm gonna hold that off, and I'm gonna think through how I'm gonna connect this to this, and then I'll get there and write it. And I would guess, Steve, that maybe you're a little bit more of a plotter, given that you came from nonfiction, which requires a lot of plotting and preparation and outlining. But yeah, I'm curious to see what your process is.
I guess I'm more that way. I don't know where exactly I fit was with the short stories. Something I get an idea, and it's kind of a complete picture. In my head, I get this complete picture. The difficult part, I kind of know where it starts and where it ends, and bits of the middle part. So it's like a complete idea. The hard part is getting all the details down on page. So I don't know how to describe it. It's like one of the stories that Meg just edited, I heard a interview on the radio with this woman who she was a singer-songwriter, and her partner was addicted to drugs, but he overcame that, and they got married, and happily ever after. And as soon as I started hearing that interview, I had this picture in my mind. Well, what if it doesn't always work that way? So I had this complete kind of picture of it not working that way. And I started, I just put some notes down on the page, and then I thought, oh, this is good. And then I just had to fill in all the details. Mm-hmm. So I don't know where
you're that. I think you're really a pantser, because that's how pantsers work. We don't sit down and write, okay, well, in this first chapter it's going to open with this and do that, and then and about here this. Pantsers, honestly, they can literally have it all laid out, or some of them do the whiteboard where they stick all the post-its on, and it's literally the whole story, and then they, but the pantsers are just like, they get an idea like you had, and then go, but what if such and such happened? What would happen then? And that's what you did with that story, which is another cool one of Steve's. Steve has a very unique way of twisting the mindset of somebody, and you get to see this completely different view. It's very fascinating. And I think
Meg tries to get me to write horror, but I write literary, and to me real life is horror enough.
In a lot of cases, yeah.
Really true.
Another story, but
well, Meg, do you come across instances of like taking on a new project where you can tell pantser or plotter, and maybe some of the challenges that you see editing wise from those different writing approaches?
To be honest, I don't think so. I think that mostly once the story's down, it's there. How you got there, look, if you got there on a plane, train, and automobile, cool. If you sat in the backwoods and wrote it, from start to finish for 6 months, that's fine too. I think that's what I'd like to say to the new writers. Don't think you've got to do it a certain way. Like you're talking about Dean Koontz, 7 days a week, 5 hours a day. Oh my God, that was my thought when I started writing. I'm never going to be a writer. I can't do that. That's so simple. I write randomly. I write sometimes, when I'm writing and I'm on a jag, I can write, like I'll write 6 hours this day, 1 hour this day. I'll jot down something in the car and it all comes together, but it's very random. And I don't write in the morning. Oh, that's the other thing. Morning writers. I mean, Steve, you're probably good at this, but I'm like, I don't have a brain in my head in the morning. And they're always like, get up at 5 o'clock in the morning, do your first writing, edit after lunch. And I'm like, no.
Yeah, no.
My brain switches into gear about 9 o'clock at night, and she's rolling. And so I write sometimes at 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, but that's my time. You really have to stay in your own process for this. This is not, it's not a paint by numbers. It is a creative process.
Yeah.
It's like painters. Painters don't get up and think, all right, it's 6, I'll start painting. They get up and the muse is there or the muse isn't there. I only work when my muse is here, and when they've gone to the Bahamas, it's tough because I can't force it for myself personally. Some writers can, they just keep writing. I think the plotters have an easier time with that, but I cannot work if my muses are not here, my brain's not connecting. I'm just like, no point. I'm wasting my time. Sometimes I will push through and I will write and I will go and I'll think, oh, this is dreadful. And I'll go back and I'll edit it and then I can pull it into lines. But you've got it, the end product, it doesn't matter how you get there. That's what I would like to say to people. It doesn't matter if you're a plotter or a pantser or a mix in between. The end story is all we're interested in. And however you get there as a writer, that's fine. I don't care if you have to sit at your local pub and drink, several drinks and get it all down. If it works, cool. It doesn't matter as long as you get the story down. That's all that matters. And a lot of that is the process of being in that creativity, because it is a creative process.
Mm-hmm.
And so it doesn't matter how you get there. And I don't see it in the edits. It doesn't make any difference in the edits at all. The story is the story, because by the time I get the story, it's fully birthed.
It's there.
We're not adding gigantic pieces to it, or taking, most of the time, not taking anything gigantic out of it either. What I will say about writers is that writers really do know their craft. And whether they're starting new or they've been in a long time, they know their craft. They may not have all the little, silly little editing rules that they've got in place, but they know their story. They know their craft. They know their own creativity. All I'm doing is taking this lovely chunk of this big gem that they found and got on paper, and all I'm doing is polishing it, cutting and polishing it to make it look all shiny and sparkly and have all its facets showing. That's all I'm doing.
Oh, I just want to bring up a point that we have to make is, I think my stories are good, and I send them to Meg and we fix them up. They are so much better. It's little tweaks. It's not big things. It's minor things, but it's night and day, really. So,
oh wow, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of eye-opening for me that just little minor things. Take a word out here, change a sentence there, but it's not that kind of thing. But it just it flows better. The ideas that you were making are made more clearly. So that's the big takeaway.
I think that brings up a good point of, what an editor's doing. It's not just, fixing typos and correcting grammar. A professional editor reads for readability. They want to make this a story that a reader can just fall into. They're not going to be, stuck on something that's like, wait, weren't their eyes blue in the last chapter? or hold on, I thought, I thought they were here instead of here. It's not to come in and tear apart your story and make you feel crappy about your ability. It's to say, okay, let's take this project and, like you said, polish it up. You're going to take away all of those little things that a reader's going to stumble on. And if a reader stumbles too much when they start out a story, they're going to put it down. And so working with an editor, it really just helps remove those itty bitty little stumbling blocks that add up really quickly and can push a reader off to read something else. And even though it feels really intimidating that first time you dive in with an editor, I think just having a better concept of what you're getting into is not this, horribly traumatic experience. Hopefully, unless it's a really, bad editor who's just not nice or helpful. But, for the most part, the editor is there to help you to, just really improve and polish and make it something that you can put out to a reader, and a reader can just really just dive into and go start to finish is the hope.
Yes.
So if you guys each, one thing that you want to, throw out there as kind of a advice or a tip or whatever, we're just about out of time. But yeah, if you guys each want to take a couple minutes and say kind of just, that last thing that you want to share with people listening on this whole process that would be helpful.
Well, the editor, they're professional and they know things. So you should listen to them. Don't listen to them blindly, but listen to them and take their advice. If you're working with someone and it's just not working, find somebody new. I lucked into working with Meg. We mesh really well. We have the same ideas. Like I say, I have to Stevify some of her wording for, so it sounds like me. But once you find somebody who works well with you, keep them. And that's what I've got to say.
Oh, thank you.
And I would agree with Steve on that, having been on both sides of the process. And I wanted to say too, in that one of the points that you bring up and that you're talking about the Stevifying that we call it, which is really fun, is that I can make a suggestion as an editor, but it is a suggestion basically. And when an editor goes back and goes, oh yeah, okay, a writer I should say, and goes back and goes, oh yeah, okay, and they rewrite the piece themselves, I'm like, yes, because that for me is a growth of the writer. Because they are like, ooh, okay. And they rewrite the piece themselves. They can accept what I say, or they can go, yeah, I see what you're saying here, and they rewrite it, I'm always like, yes, go, love the rewrite on it, because that's the writer growing too as a person and as a writer, and they're moving into their own project and being very involved in it as well, which I like. I actually like the writers who are involved in the whole process. In terms of advice, I think I've probably given most of it, is that you know, get your story on paper. That's all that matters. It doesn't matter really what shape it comes into the editor. It wants to be as, as good as you can get it, obviously. But if it was absolutely perfect, it wouldn't be coming to an editor. So don't worry too much about what it comes into, the editor like. That's their job to pull it together. If you're working with someone and they're not very nice, really go and find someone else, because it's such a hard process. You're so vulnerable. You need to be with someone who gets you, gets your writing, gets your style, and is nice to work with, and is pleasant. And you don't feel like every time the edit comes back, you're like, oh my God, is it going to be the sort of metaphorical red marks all over this, like it. And you enjoy, and like Steve and I had a lot of fun. We've got sort of irreverent sense of humor. That's always very fun to work with someone like that. You make sort of pithy comments on the side, and everybody gets them, which is fun. But don't worry. I want to say to new writers, don't worry about all your grammar and typos, because that's the editor's job. Just get that lovely chunk of story down, and then give it to somebody who can polish it up for you, because you've done the hard work. They're just coming in and just making it shine a little bit more,
Yeah. And I would say, just if I could offer one bit of advice, is just, approach the editing process as a learning experience. Some of the really good editors that I have worked with, I learned a ton from them, not just, different grammar rules and things that maybe I didn't know before, but just learning how to look back at my writing then as a more critical reader. And even as I'm writing, like, it's helped me become a better writer in the process of writing, to stop and think like, oh, these are things that have been mentioned before by my editors. Like, I need to be aware of that as I'm writing, and then I have less things to fix later on. But yeah, just approaching it in that mindset of, it's not tearing things down. It's helping you learn and grow and progress as a writer. And it can be a really great experience.
Yes, that's what it has been for me. So good. I want to thank Meg.
Awesome.
Thank you, Steve. Well, I love working with you. And that's the thing. You want to have an editor who loves editing. You do. I love editing. I love it. It's such an interesting and amazing process. And, find someone that you gel with. Honestly, because you want to feel good as a writer. If it's not gelling, and you're like, oh, this, go and find someone else. Honestly, it's fine to do that. Not every editor is going to be on the same page as you, and not every editor, as you said, you've had some terrible ones and some really good ones. But really trust your instincts on this. If it doesn't feel right, please go and find somebody else. You want someone to support you as a writer. I don't say lonely, I say lonesome process sometimes. I like the lonesome process myself as a writer, but it is very internal. So you want some feedback. You want to have someone who's supporting you and got your back, especially when you're putting out something you're like, oh, this is new. How am I doing?
Yes. Yeah, well, I just wanted to thank you guys both for coming on and talking about this today. And if you guys want to just say like where people can find you online, that would be great. And then I'll put links and everything in the show notes as well. So Steve, where can people find you?
Oh, pretty much the only place I, as an author, is on Twitter.
Okay.
It's at Novak PPR.
All right. So find Steve on Twitter and keep an eye out for new short stories coming out, hopefully in the next bit. And Meg, where can everyone find you?
Well, I'm one of these very introverted writers, so I don't update any of my social media. But if you need me, just email me basically at jocnz@yahoo.com, and just put edit in the subject line, and I will reply immediately. One of the things I do is I always try and reply within 24 hours on anything that I get correspondence from people. So you always know I'm right there. I check my email several times a day. So just email me if you need me. on that email. That's pretty much a great way to get me.
All right. Well, thank you guys so much, and best of
Thank
luck,
you.
Meg, getting some more writing time, and Steve getting your new stories out. Thank you guys again, and everybody will be back with the podcast next week with a new topic and new interviews. Thanks again for listening to Author Life Podcast. For more information on the podcast or guest authors, check out the links in the show description. If there's a topic you'd like to learn more about, find me online and send me suggestions anytime.